I still remember the first time I realized prices don't just rise because of inflation. Sometimes they rise because of power. Quiet, complicated, untouchable power. Last week, that power cracked. A federal court just ruled that most of Trump's tariffs, once called beautiful, were illegal. Overnight, the very tools that shaped prices on phones, sneakers, food, steel, cars, tools, wine, solar panels were declared unconstitutional. We're talking about hundreds of billions in trade taxes wiped off the board. But the question no one's asking is this: if the tariffs were illegal, does that mean everything got overpriced? And if that's true, who paid for it? Because here's what nobody tells you. Tariffs may sound like politics, but they show up on your grocery bill, your next iPhone, and the price of bread in Buenos Aires. I'm Nate Ledger, and today we're following the trail of tariffs, lies, and wallets under pressure. This ruling doesn't just shake DC, it might just save you money. But once I show you what I found, you'll never look at a Made in China sticker the same way again. Why did the court rule the tariffs illegal, and what does that mean for prices? I sat at my desk when the alert popped up. Federal court strikes down. Trump tariffs as illegal. And I thought, wait, what does illegal really mean here? Turns out, quite a bit. Back in 2018, President Trump leaned on a dusty old law, the 1977 International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to justify sweeping tariffs on goods from nearly 70 countries. His justification: that the U.S. faced an economic emergency from unfair trade practices. EPA was never meant for that. It was designed for true emergencies, national security threats, terror finance, cyber attacks, not blanket trade penalties. The court said so clearly, tariffs aren't emergency powers. They're Congress's job, not the president's, period. The ruling, delivered in late August 2025, landed like a punch. According to AP News and TIME, this wasn't a minor technicality. It struck at the legal foundation of a massive economic strategy, one that taxed hundreds of billions in imports, clothes, electronics, tools, solar panels, cars. But what's actually changing? Here's the catch. The court didn't erase all tariffs. The ruling targeted Trump's reciprocal tariffs, broad retaliatory taxes he imposed in 2020, aiming to punish countries that taxed American goods. These were sweeping, affecting nearly 70 countries. And now, they're invalidated. What still stands? Steel and aluminum tariffs under Section 232, national security measures under Section 301. Those are staying, for now. So, how does this hit prices? Well, if you're shopping for imported goods, electronics, apparel, household tools, you may start seeing relief. Some items had up to 25% tariffs baked in. Remove those and costs could fall fast. But here's the twist. The ruling takes effect now, but the tariffs themselves don't vanish until mid-October, pending appeals. Will companies pass those savings to you? That's the billion-dollar question. Because if they do, this ruling isn't just symbolic. It could change what your next shopping trip costs. And that opens a much deeper question. Who pays the price for tariffs and who benefits? I remember watching the news in 2018, factories cheering, politicians clapping. They said tariffs would bring jobs back, fix unfair trade, and make America rich again. But then, my washing machine got more expensive. No one told us that when the US slaps a tariff on imported goods, it's not foreign countries who pay first. It's us, regular people, families. Let's break it down simply. When Trump put a 20% tariff on imported washing machines, US companies didn't absorb that cost. They passed it on. Prices for washers went up approximately 12% almost overnight, and dryers, ironically untouched by tariffs, rose approximately 8% just because they're often sold together. Within a year, according to economists, $1.4 billion in extra costs hit U.S. households. That's money people could have spent on rent, food, or savings. But where did it go? Some of it padded profits. Some went to U.S. companies avoiding competition, but much of it just disappeared into the cost of doing business. And that's only washing machines. Let's talk China tariffs. The US hit over $350 billion worth of Chinese goods with tariffs, many in the 10 to 25% range. That included electronics, toys, tools, furniture, and intermediate goods, the raw materials US manufacturers need to make their own products. As a result, prices of those parts shot up 10 to 30%, squeezing US businesses. Some had to lay off workers, others raised prices. And guess who paid? You, me, everyone. According to Goldman Sachs, American consumers absorbed 22% of tariff costs directly, but over time, that number likely climbed to 70%. So while some industries won in the short term, millions of Americans quietly lost, dollar by dollar, item by item. And here's the twist. Even when prices go up due to tariffs, they rarely come back down once the tariff ends. So what happens now that some of those tariffs are being lifted? Will prices really drop, or is it just legal noise? When I first read the ruling, I thought, this could be big. Tariffs ruled illegal, billions in trade barriers potentially gone. But then I checked the markets. Nothing moved, no rally, no retail stocks surging, no major futures jumps. Why? Because like most legal decisions, this one comes with delay. The U.S. Court of International Trade may have ruled that Trump's broad retaliatory tariffs were unconstitutional, but the government filed an immediate appeal. That gives them a grace period until mid-October 2025. So until then, the tariffs still stand. That means if you're shopping for imported headphones, sneakers, blenders, or furniture, you're still paying the inflated prices caused by those import taxes, some as high as 25%. And here's where it gets murkier. Retailers have already priced in those tariffs. They've built their inventory, supply chains, and logistics around them for 5+ years. Removing the tariffs doesn't guarantee your next iPad gets cheaper. In fact, it may not change anything unless retailers adjust, suppliers renegotiate, and demand shifts. Right now, Wall Street knows that. That's why companies like Target, Best Buy, and Walmart barely moved in the days after the ruling. A cautious investor sentiment hangs in the air. One JP Morgan analyst said it bluntly. Even if the tariffs end, we may not feel it at the register until early next year, if at all. And that's the paradox. The ruling is real. The relief is possible. But the results? Still locked in limbo. So if prices don't drop tomorrow, don't be shocked. This is more of a legal chess match than an economic earthquake, at least for now. But this isn't the first time Americans have waited on tariff relief. Tariffs through time, who's paid the price before? I've learned something from digging through old economic archives. Every time tariffs show up, someone loses a job. Take 2002, for example. President George W. Bush imposed temporary steel tariffs up to 30% to protect American steel workers. It made headlines. Unions applauded, factories cheered. But within a year, more than 200,000 jobs were lost in steel-consuming industries, like construction, auto parts, and appliances. That's more than the entire U.S. steel workforce at the time. Why? Because when steel costs rise, everything that uses steel becomes more expensive. Builders pause projects. Companies cut workers to stay afloat. In the end, the tariff meant to protect jobs actually destroyed more than it saved. Let's jump to the 2018 to 2020 US-China trade war. Over $350 billion worth of Chinese goods were hit with tariffs. Everything from toys, TVs, furniture, semiconductors, even bicycles. China responded with tariffs on $110 billion in US goods, mostly farm products. Soybean exports collapsed. US farmers lost billions in orders. The government had to issue $28 billion in bailouts just to keep them afloat. Meanwhile, supply chains shattered. A single electronic part delayed in China meant factories in Ohio or Michigan stalled. Small businesses were hit the hardest. They couldn't afford the new costs. Even America's friends weren't spared. Remember the Canada-Mexico trade tension in 2025? Retaliatory tariffs caused housing material prices to jump 15%, gas prices surged, and Yale estimated a $1,200 annual purchasing power loss for the average household. So if tariffs are meant to protect, why do they leave such wreckage? History shows they often work politically, but fail economically, especially when used like a hammer instead of a scalpel. But if so many get hurt, surely someone gains, right? So who gains? When tariffs drop, and who could lose? When I heard the court ruled the tariffs illegal, I didn't just think about trade policy, I thought about your grocery bill and the price tag on a pair of Nikes. Because if tariffs fall, some people win instantly. First, consumers like you and me. Those 10 to 25% import taxes were baked into everyday items. Shoes, phones, toys, TVs, clothes, tools. Remove them, and retailers have room to drop prices or offer more discounts without losing margin. Apparel alone saw huge hikes after the tariffs. In some cases, prices jumped 18 to 22%, especially for imported brands from Asia. If even half of that rolls back, you might save $5 to $15 per clothing item. Then come the retail giants. Companies like Walmart, Best Buy, and Target, all of whom rely heavily on foreign imports, suddenly regain pricing power. Time magazine noted that import-heavy chains were forced to raise prices or eat costs to compete. Now, they can win back shoppers and pressure smaller retailers to follow, but for every winner, there's a loser. U.S. manufacturers in industries like steel, aluminum, solar panels, and furniture suddenly face cheaper imports again. That can mean layoffs, reduced margins, or even factory closures if they can't compete on price. And let's not forget the politicians who built their messaging on tough trade. With the tariffs ruled illegal, their bargaining chip evaporates. They lose leverage and possibly voter trust. There's also a ripple effect abroad. Exporters in Vietnam, Mexico, and India who saw demand spike when China was hit with tariffs may now face less U.S. demand again if China returns to the supply chain. So while prices might fall on shelves, the balance of power across global trade is shifting. But what happens when those powers push back? What politicians and markets are saying, and what comes next? The moment the ruling dropped, I knew Trump wouldn't stay quiet. Sure enough, within hours, his response came loud and clear. This is a total disaster for America. He called the court's decision a gift to China, promised an appeal to the Supreme Court, and vowed to reinstate tariffs if reelected. That message wasn't just for the media, it was for his base, for Wall Street, and for foreign leaders watching every move. But here's what's happening behind the curtain. The U.S. Trade Representative USTR, led by Katherine Tai, immediately launched a review. They're exploring alternate legal grounds like Section 301, used to fight unfair trade, and even laws from the 1930s. Because while IEEPA was struck down, the appetite for tariffs in Washington hasn't gone away. Markets, meanwhile, are playing the long game. The S&P 500 barely moved. Retail stocks like Target and Home Depot ticked up slightly. Investors know legal delays mean little changes until October, and maybe not even then. Still, uncertainty is rising. The Chamber of Commerce said the ruling may destabilize trade enforcement. Meanwhile, economists warn that constant legal shifts discourage long-term supply chain planning, especially for small and medium-sized businesses and the public. Support for tariffs has dropped. In 2018, only 52% of Americans opposed tariffs. In 2025, that number is now 60%, according to recent polling by Pew. Voters are feeling the squeeze, and now they're connecting the dots between tariffs and their wallets. But while politics clash and markets wobble, there's a deeper historical truth behind tariffs most people forget. How to spot the change. Practical moves to make if tariffs drop. I'm not an economist in a suit. I'm a guy who checks price tags like everyone else. So here's the truth. If these tariffs vanish by October, you could feel it at the checkout counter, but only if you know where to look. Start with your grocery bill. Certain goods hit hardest by tariffs: cotton, clothes, pork, beef, rice, some packaged snacks, even canned goods might dip in price. Watch for signs like tariff-free or new price adjustment on imported items. Retailers often test lower prices quietly before advertising them. Next, electronics. Headphones, laptops, TVs, even chargers and kitchen appliances from Asia were slapped with up to 25% tariffs. If the ruling sticks and retailers adjust, you could save 5 to 30% by year's end. Maybe now's the time to delay that big electronics purchase just a little longer. Here's a budgeting tip I swear by. Set a 3-month tracker on staple items: rice, pasta, laundry detergent. Note the baseline prices now, then again in November. You'll spot tariff relief before headlines do. And what about your income? If prices fall even slightly, your inflation-adjusted income just increased. That's real. That's rare. Use it. Prepay utilities, refill pantry items, lock in lower monthly costs before the market catches up. Remember, prices are sticky. Once they rise, they rarely fall. But this is one of those rare chances where legal change could mean actual relief. Will it last? No one knows. But if you act early, you'll feel the difference. Maybe even quietly smile at the checkout. Big shifts like this don't come every day. If today's news puts a lighter shade on your wallet, hit subscribe for more stories that matter, not just headlines, but how they shape your life and bottom line.